Imagine a desolate Florida highway where 7 men met a chilling end at the hands of one woman, Aileen Wuornos. This is not the tale of an ordinary woman but of a figure whose name would become synonymous with ruthless brutality and cold-blooded savagery. Aileen Wuornos, a name that would send shivers down the spine of America's sunny state, embarked on a murder spree that began in the late 80s and bled into the dawn of the 90s. Her victims were men who had the misfortune of crossing her path, men who solicited her for sex work. The modus operandi was chillingly consistent. She would lure these unsuspecting men under the guise of a transaction, only to turn the tables in the most horrific way possible. Her victims were diverse, spanning across different ages and backgrounds, but they shared a common fate: a violent end on the deserted stretches of Florida's highways. These highways, once symbols of freedom and mobility, became the stage for Wuornos's reign of terror. Her weapon of choice was a firearm, and she wielded it with a chillingly detached precision, leaving a trail of death in her wake. The sheer brutality of these crimes was enough to earn Wuornos a notorious reputation, but what truly set her apart was her audacious justification. She claimed that each murder was an act of self-defense, a response to attempted sexual assault. But as the body count rose and the evidence mounted, this claim began to unravel, revealing a more sinister reality. The murder spree was not just a series of isolated incidents, it was a manifestation of Wuornos's escalating violence. It was a chilling testament to how far she was willing to go, how many lives she was willing to extinguish to ensure her survival in a world that had shown her little kindness. Aileen Wuornos was no ordinary woman. Her crimes were brutal, savage, and left a trail of death in her wake. As we delve deeper into her life and crimes, we will try to unravel the complex web of factors that transformed her into one of America's most infamous female serial killers. Born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, Aileen Wuornos's early life was a far cry from the ordinary. A tumultuous beginning set the stage for a life that would be marked by instability, violence, and ultimately, infamy. Her story is one of turbulence, from the moment she entered the world to the moment she exited it. The seeds of chaos were sown early in Wuornos's life. Her parents separated when she was just a child, leaving her in a state of constant flux. Home life was anything but stable, a revolving door of uncertainty and unrest. Her mother abandoned her, and her father, a convicted child molester, committed suicide while in prison. Wuornos and her older brother were left in the care of their grandparents, but even this proved to be a far cry from the nurturing environment every child deserves. But the turmoil didn't stop at the doorstep of her family home. The abuse extended beyond the walls of her house and into her personal life. Wuornos claimed she was subjected to sexual abuse by family members, a horrific ordeal that no child should ever have to endure. This experience, coupled with her unstable home life, created a toxic mix that would influence her future actions. To compound her troubled upbringing, Wuornos found herself embroiled in criminal activities from a young age. She was no stranger to the darker side of life, and it seemed that the path she was on was paved with nothing but hardship and adversity. From petty theft to more serious crimes, Wuornos was no stranger to the law, a relationship that would only intensify as she grew older. From a young age, Wuornos was on a dark path, one that would eventually lead to unimaginable horrors. The early chapters of her life story are a stark reminder that our beginnings can shape us, for better or for worse. In Wuornos's case, the hardships of her early years were a precursor to a life of crime that would shock the nation and earn her a place in the annals of America's most notorious serial killers. In her late teens, Wuornos turned to the world's oldest profession, a life on the harsh streets. In the unforgiving world of survival, Aileen Wuornos found herself selling her body for sustenance. This precarious lifestyle was not only perilous, but also pitted her against the law, marking the beginning of her criminal history. As a sex worker, Wuornos navigated a reality fraught with danger and exploitation. Each day was a battle against the odds, a struggle to survive. But her resilience was often misconstrued as defiance, leading to several encounters with the law. Her criminal record began to accumulate, reflecting a pattern of increasing aggression and desperation. Wuornos's rap sheet wasn't limited to prostitution-related offenses. She was frequently in trouble with the law for various crimes, such as assault and robbery. These incidents were not isolated but rather manifestations of a life spiraling out of control. Behind each arrest, there was a story of survival, of a woman trying to navigate a world that seemed set against her. One particular incident stands out: a barroom brawl that escalated into a major assault. This event marked a pivotal point in Wuornos's life, a testament to her increasing volatility. From disorderly conduct to outright violence, her criminal activities began to take on a more menacing tone. However, the most alarming aspect of Wuornos's criminal history is not the nature of the crimes she committed, but rather their progression. We see a transition from petty offenses to serious crimes, an escalation that suggests a deepening desperation and a growing disregard for the law. This escalation didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a function of her circumstances, her environment, and her struggle to survive. But it also signaled a shift in her mindset, a growing recklessness that would eventually lead her down a path of no return. As Wuornos grew older, her criminal activities escalated, culminating in a deadly rampage. Her life as a sex worker, her criminal history, and the escalating violence were all precursors to the infamous murder spree that would make her one of America's most notorious female serial killers. 1989 marked the beginning of a terrifying murder spree orchestrated by Wuornos. This year was the start of a chilling chapter in her life, a period filled with heinous acts that would etch her name into the annals of America's most notorious serial killers. Wuornos's victims were men, all of whom had one thing in common: they had solicited her for sex work. This detail is crucial in understanding Wuornos's twisted justification for her crimes. She claimed that each murder was an act of self-defense, asserting that the men she killed had attempted to sexually assault her. However, the sheer number of victims and the manner in which they were killed cast doubt on these claims. The murders were brutal, each one more chilling than the last. 7 men ranging in age and background were shot dead by Wuornos. Their bodies were discovered along the Florida highways, a grim testament to Wuornos's murderous spree. These were not random acts of violence, but a calculated series of killings. Wuornos had turned from a life of petty crime to become a cold-blooded murderer. As the body count grew, so did the fear. The idea of a female serial killer was almost unheard of at the time, and the media latched onto the story, dubbing Wuornos the damsel of death. But behind the sensational headlines was a woman whose life was marked by abuse and desperation, a woman who had turned to violence as a means of survival. The year 1990 saw the end of Wuornos's murder spree. The law was closing in, and it was only a matter of time before she would be apprehended. But even as the net tightened, Wuornos continued to insist that she had acted in self-defense, a claim that would become a key point of contention in her trial. With 7 men dead, the law finally caught up to Wuornos, ending her spree of violence. Her reign of terror had come to an end, but the debate over her actions and their motivations was only just beginning. As we delve further into the life and crimes of Aileen Wuornos, we'll continue to explore the complex, disturbing narrative that surrounds this infamous figure. In 1991, the law finally caught up with Wuornos, and her capture marked the beginning of a sensational trial. The net had been closing in on her for some time, and when the police finally linked her to the murders, she was arrested. This was the end of her reign of terror, but the beginning of a media circus that would captivate the nation. Wuornos was no stranger to the criminal justice system, but this was different. This was murder. Not just one, but multiple first-degree murders. The weight of her crimes began to sink in, and under the pressure of interrogation, she confessed. She admitted to the killings, all 7 of them. But this was not a straightforward case of a remorseful criminal confessing to her crimes. No, Wuornos was a fighter. She would later recant her confession, claiming that she had acted in self-defense. She painted a picture of herself as a victim, a woman forced to kill in order to protect herself from the men who sought to exploit her. Her trial was a spectacle, the likes of which had rarely been seen. The media descended like vultures, eager to document every twist and turn. The courtroom was a stage, and Wuornos, the leading lady. Her striking appearance, her story of abuse and survival, and her claims of self-defense made her a fascinating figure. She was a woman who had been dealt a harsh hand by life, and who had responded in a way that was both shocking and intriguing. The trial was not just about Wuornos, though. It was about society's views on prostitution, on women, on abuse, and on justice. It was a trial that asked difficult questions, and that forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. The jury deliberated and the verdict was returned. Guilty. Guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder. Wuornos, the woman who had lived her life on the fringes of society, who had killed 7 men, was now facing the ultimate punishment. Convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder, Wuornos was facing the ultimate punishment. The court showed no mercy to Wuornos, sentencing her to the harshest punishment possible. The voice of justice rang out clear and resounding as Aileen Wuornos, a woman who had become a notorious figure in the annals of American crime, received the death penalty for her actions. Wuornos's sentencing was not simply a matter of meting out punishment for her crimes. It represented a pivotal moment in the criminal justice system, sparking widespread debates about the fairness of her trial. Critics argued that her troubled past, marked by abandonment, abuse, and instability, should have been taken into account. They contended that the systemic failures that had shaped Wuornos's life were inextricably interwoven with her violent actions. Yet, for all the sympathy her background might have aroused, others saw Wuornos in a different light. To them, she was not a product of a broken system but a cold-blooded serial killer, a woman who had taken the lives of 7 men in cold blood. This perspective held that Wuornos deserved the harshest penalty under the law, irrespective of her personal history. In the midst of these conflicting viewpoints, the question of Wuornos's mental state also came into play. Some suggested that Wuornos's claims of self-defense, followed by her recantation, indicated a troubled mind, further complicating the narrative of her guilt. Could a woman who exhibited such instability truly be held fully accountable for her crimes? The debates raged on, but the verdict was irrefutable. Regardless of the differing perspectives, the court had spoken. Wuornos was to pay the ultimate price for her actions. The fairness of her trial, her troubled past, and the question of her mental state were all secondary to the stark reality of her sentence. Despite the debates, Wuornos was set to pay for her crimes with her life. Her sentencing marked the end of one chapter in the saga of Aileen Wuornos, but as we'll find out in the next scene, it was far from the end of her story. On October 9, 2002, Wuornos's life ended, not by her own violent hand, but by the state's. This marked the culmination of a life steeped in violence, a life that had taken a deadly toll on 7 men. More than a decade had passed since Wuornos was first sentenced to death. More than a decade in which she lingered on death row, her fate sealed, her future certain. Her execution took place at Florida State Prison. The method was lethal injection, a seemingly serene departure from the brutal violence that had characterized her crimes. Yet even in this, there was a grim echo of the lives she had taken, the lives that had ended at her hands. Wuornos's execution was not a quiet affair. It marked the end of one of Florida's most infamous criminal cases, a case that had captured the public's attention and stirred heated debate.